How to get a perfect epoxy floor. In this video, I'm sharing you 5 tips so you can get floors like this one here. We're talking about self-leveling epoxy floors, and the question I want us to answer is how can we get these perfect looking surfaces? Or to put it a different way, we completed a great project recently and one of my staff members said, why can't all projects turn out this good? Here's an example of a perfect looking epoxy floor. How do we get these types of floors? And I've identified 5 factors that are important, that are essential to get perfect looking floors. And this is the purpose of this video. I want to tell you what these 5 tips are. And I also want to emphasize that you may not be able to have all 5 conditions present because that's just the way it is. But you really need to have at least 2 or 3 of them present to be able to ensure a good floor. If you don't have at least 2 or 3, you're in for some trouble. So let's have a look at these 5 conditions. Number 1, you want warm and dry weather. Epoxy is best applied in warm and dry weather. When I say warm, I say 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is about 75 to 85 Fahrenheit. You don't want to go too much above that because then you have other problems with heating, with the floor curing too quickly. And I'll post a video about that. You can click on the video if you want to watch that. But at this temperature, the epoxy is great because the flow of the product is good. It cures fairly quickly, but not too fast. And you tend to have less problems with humidity and blushing. These are problems we get when it gets cold, that the floor is slow to cure and you get this moisture that goes and sits on the uncured epoxy and you get all sorts of problems. So if you want a good looking floor, you're best off doing it in warm and dry weather. And if it's cold outside, if you can somehow get the area air conditioned, even better, and have a warm environment to apply the floor. Here's an example of this floor we did for a manufacturer, and what's interesting here is we did this in early October and the floor turned out really well. However, there was one part where he called us and we did it in February under very cold conditions, and the floor did not turn out as well. It was a really cold day, there was a lot of moisture, this was a basement, and it just doesn't have the gloss and the appearance that this floor has. And I really saw the difference between the exact same product applied in different conditions. This is what you get if you apply it in warm weather, like in early October, compared to applying it in February. Number 2, the second important point for having a perfect floor. You want a flat substrate. This is important because some people think that we can just pour a self-leveling epoxy over an existing floor and magically everything levels out. And I want to warn you, no, this is not the case. Self-leveling epoxy works best on a flat substrate. In this picture, we see someone grinding the floor, and grinding does help smoothen out the substrate. Although that's not the only purpose of grinding. We also grind to clean the floor and to make it easier to bond with the epoxy. But I want to emphasize this: you want a flat floor for a better final result. So if your floor is not flat and you're looking for a really good result, you're going to have to spend a lot of time preparing, screeding. Depending on your situation, you might have to do various different interventions in the floor before you are ready to coat with epoxy. So a flat substrate is a prerequisite. It's really important that you have a flat floor to apply a good epoxy. And I want to emphasize here, self-leveling epoxy, if you apply a 2 or 3 millimeter floor, it can really account for really small differences in the floor, 1 or 2 millimeters. So if your floor has uneven parts that's up to 5 millimeters or 1 centimeter, self-leveling epoxy will not fix the problem. And anyone that thinks you can just pour more and more and more epoxy until it's level, I do not recommend that. It's going to cost you a lot of money and you're never guaranteed to have a great result. Before I go on to number 3, can you please take a moment, if you haven't already, and subscribe to this channel. It's important for me. The more people I have subscribing and liking and sharing my videos, the easier it is for me to continue bringing out videos, because YouTube then the algorithm shows these videos to more people, and it's easier for me to continue bringing out these videos. So please take a moment and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's move on to number 3 now. Number 3 is different compared to the previous two factors. This one's about having a good relationship with your customer. Obviously, this is about professionals. If you are doing this as a professional and you work with other companies or other individuals, you want to have a good relationship with the customer. I have found when I work with micromanaging customers that are nitpicky and saying, oh, what's this, what's that, do this, do that, it just completely, you lose your focus, you lose your sense of direction. And the most problems I've ever had with floors has always been with micromanaging customers. The second important point I want to emphasize is that you want to avoid customers that squeeze you on your budget, because when customers start squeezing you and asking for discounts and saying, I can only give you this much, when you get caught in this vicious circle of just taking on projects at a low margin, what ends up happening is you start skimping on products. You start looking for your own shortcuts to not go over budget and lose money on the project. And that is why I'm always happy working with customers that are paying full price, because I know those customers, if something goes wrong, I don't have a problem using up more product or recoding a part of the surface. So it's always important, avoid customers that squeeze you on budget, because that always comes back to bite you. And another important point about having a good relationship with your customer is you want full support from this customer. So if you are working in an area and there's people walking around, you want them to make sure, please don't let anyone come here. Or please, I don't want people walking around. Please close the doors. Or something as simple as, I'm going to need more power supplies to grind the floor properly. Can we have these power supplies ready when we apply the floor? There's nothing more frustrating than a customer telling you that everything is fine and you show up and there's just one power supply at the other end of the building that is insufficient for your needs. So this is very, very important that you have this good, open relationship with your customer. It's a real red flag if before you enter a project and the customer is trying to squeeze you on budget and they're just being nitpicky. Those are red flags, and you should try to avoid these projects. And here's an example of, this is actually a service shop for a sports car company. And we had a really good relationship with this customer, and they were very cooperative. They really let us do the work properly. And this floor has been in use for years, and look how good it looks. They maintain it really well too, but this is the type of customers I enjoy working with. So, important point, the customer should be quick to help out and fix any problems. Let's move on to number 4, the fourth condition for a perfect epoxy floor. You want an isolated workspace. And this is kind of continuing to what we said before about the customer, but have a look at this picture. We were working in a factory where they were obviously still working, but we isolated the workspace. And this is very important if you want to have a successful floor. You don't want people wandering around on the floor where you're applying. You do not want it to be a transit area. You want to avoid any windows and doors and draft, which is not always avoidable, but the less wind and the less draft and the less dust being blown up, the better for you. I absolutely can't stand working on construction sites, on new buildings where you're being told to do the floor in the basement. And even though it's no one is allowed to enter the area, you always have some random electrician that shows up and says, I need to fix this wire. Or someone else says, oh, I'll be out of your way in a minute, just let me do this pipe here. And it's just always random people wandering around, and even though you've told them you can't be here, they still show up there. So this is a very important condition. If you want the floor to be successful, you want the place to be isolated. Very, very important. And I also want to tell you that dust particles are a common problem when the floor is not isolated. So you're doing a perfect job, and then some dust gets trapped, and it gets trapped in the coating and is visible. And these are the things that happen because you're not able to clean the floor properly, because there's always people wandering around, or there's always people rushing by. So you want to have the area where you're working as isolated as possible. Here's an example of a perfectly isolated floor. This is for a pharmaceutical company, and they have all these labs. And here, there is no one walking around. All the labs are closed off. There are no windows. There are no exterior doors. You just go in the room, you close everything, and you can do your floor, and you don't have to worry about drafts and random people walking around. And this is why I find that my best projects are usually in pharmaceutical companies, and the reason is because they have this isolated environment built in. I mean, they manufacture pharmaceuticals, so they need to have that environment for their own purposes. And that always, my best projects are always in pharmaceutical companies, exactly because you don't have that wear and tear and people running around. So I absolutely love working with pharmaceutical companies because they have these great conditions. Number 5, finally the fifth point, is the time schedule. Now, depending on where you're working, some customers will give you a very tight window, others will give you more days. But when you have a narrow time window, something like you can come in on Friday, but we need to work on Monday, you cannot guarantee perfect floors. Because let's face it, a lot of times you need to do some surface prep, you need to grout, you need to prime, then you realize it needs more sanding and more regrouting, and sometimes a floor that looks easy may actually need 3 or 4 or 5 days to be completed, plus the time it needs to cure. So this is very important. If a customer is demanding that you finish in a very small time window, you need to let the customer know the limitations of working in a small time window. If the floor has lots of cracks and scratches and holes and all sorts of problems, the customer must understand that you cannot get everything done in 2 or 3 days. And here's an example of one of my staff members re-sanding an area that wasn't completely level before we recoated it. Very, very important. So those are the 5 conditions. And I'm going to leave you with this image here of a floor we did. This is a kitchen for a big multinational company. And in this floor, we had all 5 conditions present. We did the floor in the summer, so it was great. We already had an existing flat substrate. We had a very good relationship with the customer, very good. They were nice enough to isolate the entire area and tell the staff you cannot enter this area for several days. And finally, we were given ample time to complete the floor. So I want to leave you, and if you want to learn more about epoxies and how to apply perfect floors and to learn the details and all the secrets and the tricks of the industry, you need to check out our online course. We relaunched it in 2021. It's got much more videos and much more materials, and taking on epoxy flooring, and I'm learning lots of things. So I definitely invite you to join and check it out. I'm going to post a link below to our online course. The course is called Learn Epoxy Floors. Have a look at the link. Thank you very much for watching. And if you haven't already, please like and share and comment on this video if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.